berserker charged forward, foam dripping from his mouth, caring nothing for the blade that would pierce his chest. The shieldmaiden beside him moved like water, her spear finding the gap between ribs with surgical precision. Both warriors, both deadly, but their methods of killing couldn't have been more different. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Norse society created two completely opposite paths to the same bloody destination, and which one actually dominated the battlefield when the sagas were written down. The answer will completely change how you see Viking warfare. But first, we need to destroy the biggest lie about shieldmaidens that Hollywood keeps spreading. Modern movies show shieldmaidens as essentially female berserkers, wild, screaming warriors who charge into battle with reckless abandon. But the Norse sagas tell a radically different story. When you actually read the Poetic Edda and the various family sagas, shieldmaidens emerge as tactical fighters who survived through discipline, technique, and strategic thinking. They had to be, because unlike berserkers who could rely on their drug-induced rage and overwhelming physical strength, shieldmaidens operated in a world where one mistake meant death. Let me show you what real shieldmaiden training looked like according to the sources. The Hervarar saga describes how the legendary shieldmaiden Hervor was trained not in berserker fury, but in precise weapons handling and tactical awareness. The saga specifically mentions her skill with the sword Tyrfing, emphasizing her technical mastery rather than raw aggression. This wasn't accidental. Shieldmaidens couldn't afford to waste energy on theatrical displays of rage. They needed every movement to count, and here's where it gets fascinating. The training split between berserkers and shieldmaidens started in childhood, and it was based on one brutal reality that determined everything. Berserkers trained to become unstoppable forces. The Ynglinga saga tells us they fought without armor, wild as dogs or wolves, bit their shields, and were as strong as bears or bulls. Their training focused on building pain tolerance, developing explosive strength, and entering altered mental states. They practiced fighting through injuries that would drop normal warriors. They learned to channel rage into raw, destructive power. Archaeological evidence from sites like Firkat shows berserkers were often larger men, their skeletons revealing extensive muscle attachment points and healed combat injuries that would have been fatal to lesser warriors. But shieldmaidens, they trained for something completely different. And this is the part that makes them arguably more impressive. The Laxdæla saga describes Freydis Eiríksdóttir, one of the most famous historical shieldmaidens. When attacked by natives in Vinland, she didn't go berserk. Instead, she picked up a sword from a fallen warrior, pulled out her breasts, and slapped the blade against them while shouting challenges. This stopped the attackers cold, not through violence, but through psychological warfare and tactical intimidation. That's shieldmaiden thinking. Every action calculated for maximum impact with minimum risk. Their weapons training reflected this philosophy entirely. Berserkers favored axes and swords, close-range weapons that required them to dive into the chaos of shield walls where their fearlessness became an advantage. The Volsunga saga describes berserkers using weapons as clubs, overwhelming opponents through ferocious, relentless attacks. They trained to hack, smash, and batter their way through enemy lines. Finesse wasn't the point, destruction was. Shieldmaidens mastered the spear and bow, weapons that killed from distance and required precision over power. The Hervarar saga specifically mentions Hervor's spear work, describing how she could strike vital points from positions that kept her outside her opponent's reach. This wasn't cowardice. This was tactical brilliance. Why enter the meat grinder of close combat when you could eliminate threats before they reached you? And here's something the sagas make crystal clear that changes everything about how these warriors operated. Berserkers trained to ignore pain. They bit their shields to build pain tolerance. They fought in freezing water to numb their bodies. Some scholars believe they consumed drugs like henbane, or Amanita muscaria mushrooms to enter trance states. The Haraldskvedi poem describes them as Ulfhednar and berserkers who, in the battle, slew the foemen, were not harmed by iron or flame. Their training built warriors who could take catastrophic damage and keep fighting until blood loss finally dropped them. Shieldmaidens trained to never get hit in the first place. This is the key difference that defines everything. The Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus describes the Shieldmaiden Lagertha leading troops with tactical formations, using terrain advantages and positioning warriors for maximum effectiveness. She didn't need to absorb damage, because she never let enemies get close enough to deliver it. Her training focused on reading battlefields, anticipating opponent movements, and controlling engagement distances. Think about what this means for their actual combat techniques. A berserker in Holmgang, the Viking trial by combat, would advance relentlessly, taking hits on his shield or even his body, waiting for the opening to deliver one devastating counterstrike. The Egil saga describes berserkers who would deliberately take wounds to get inside their opponent's guard, then crush them with overwhelming force. Pain was temporary, victory was eternal. A shield maiden in the same situation would maintain distance, use footwork to create angles, and strike from positions of safety. The Laxdela saga shows Freydis using verbal tactics, psychological warfare, and strategic positioning before ever drawing a weapon. When she did fight, it was calculated. Maximum damage from minimum exposure. But here's where Viking society gets really interesting, and it reveals something profound about how they viewed warfare. Both fighting styles were respected, but for different reasons. Berserkers were feared and admired for their raw courage and devastating power. They represented the ultimate warrior ideal, a man so committed to victory that he transcended human limitations through will and rage. They were the shock troops, the champions, the warriors you sent when you needed an enemy line shattered through pure violence. Shield maidens were respected for their tactical acumen and survival instincts. The sagas described them as leaders, strategists, and warriors who could hold their own without sacrificing their lives needlessly. They represented a different kind of courage, the discipline to stay calm while death surrounded them, the wisdom to choose when to strike and when to wait. And archaeological evidence supports this distinction beautifully. The few confirmed female warrior burials we've discovered, like the Birka warrior grave in Sweden, contain weapons positioned for tactical use: arrows, spears, and tactical blades. Their remains show women who were clearly trained fighters, but their grave goods suggest strategic warfare rather than berserker-style close combat. No one buried a shield maiden with just an axe and rage. They buried her with the tools of a complete warrior, someone who needed options, not just overwhelming force. This brings us to the question that matters most: which approach actually worked better on real battlefields? The answer depends entirely on the situation. Berserkers excelled at breaking shield walls, eliminating enemy champions, and creating chaos that routed enemy forces. The Ynglinga saga tells us that having berserkers in your army was a massive psychological advantage. Enemies who faced them were often defeated before the battle even began, their will broken by the sight of these howling warriors. But shield maidens brought something berserkers couldn't: sustainability. A berserker might win a single battle through overwhelming violence, but they often died doing it. The Vatnsdæla saga describes Jökull, a berserker who won numerous fights, but eventually died young from accumulated injuries and, according to some translations, possibly from the long-term effects of whatever substances enabled his berserker state. Shield maidens like Lagertha, according to Saxo Grammaticus, led forces for years, won multiple campaigns, and died old. Their training philosophy, survive first, kill second, meant they could fight repeatedly without burning out. On extended campaigns or in wars of attrition, tactical discipline beat unsustainable rage every time. And here's the final truth the sagas reveal about these two warrior paths. They weren't really competing philosophies, they were complementary strategies. The smartest Viking commanders, according to the sagas, used both. Send the berserkers to break the initial contact, create chaos, and shatter enemy morale. Then deploy the shieldmaidens and disciplined warriors to exploit the gaps, hold positions, and complete the victory with tactical precision. The berserkers' job was to make the impossible possible through transcendent violence. The shieldmaidens' job was to turn possibility into victory through strategic execution, different training, different techniques, different purposes. But on the battlefield, both paths led to the same destination, enemy dead at your feet, and victory secured for your clan. That's why Norse society created two radically different ways to train killers. Because warfare isn't won through a single approach. It's won by having the right warrior for the right moment. Whether that warrior achieves victory through unstoppable rage or calculated precision.